They've gone from one theocratic fascist to another theocratic fascist to another theocratic fascist. It's always been the Islamic Republic. There's been this veneer of a fake democracy, and the only difference now is this illusion is totally gone.
This is the Global Gambit.
How's it going, everybody? It's your boy, and this time we're talking about Iran. You'll see later on in the conversation, there were quite a lot of areas of disagreement we had over how to engage Iran, or not at all, and whether or not it would risk the entirety of peace and stability in the Middle East. Daniel Bordman is a good friend of the channel and senior editor of the National Telegraph. Now, if you're new around here, welcome, good to see you. This was part one in a two-part conversation, of which you'll be able to find here. And as you'll see, the quality of the filming wasn't quite up to the standard that we're going for now, being filmed essentially in the hallway between a bathroom door and the front door of a room. So if you find that rather amusing, do consider subscribing, liking the video. At the very least, it helps small channels like these to grow. And I'd love to have you as part of the journey as we continue to grow and make better quality content.
Iran, how do you feel about the Chinese visit from Hegemony? I can't even say his name.
I mean, you know, evil is as evil does. I mean, this is two evil nations getting together. You know, we there is the new. I mean, we love axes, like three bad countries.
Autocratic axis.
Yeah, you gotta have an axis of evil, and that's clearly the Islamic Republic, the CCP, and Russia right now, right? That's the anti-Western, anti-freedom axis, and they're tied in together. The Chinese get cheap Iranian oil to help them skirt the sanctions, and they're all economically dependent on them. So yeah, Raisi, Khomeini, and Xi Jinping, a bunch of theocratic, fascist, communist dictators get together. Yeah, it's no good for anyone. This is where I get accused of maybe being a globalist or being anti-globalist. I see Obama's worldview geopolitically as globalist geopolitics. And by this, I mean like the multilateralism, multinationalism theory, whatever you want to call it. The Obama theory that if America just lets if there's no number one country, right? If America is equal with China and the EU and Russia and Iran and, the African Union and a coalition of South American countries, if we all 10 people sit at the top instead of one, this will bring a more productive and peaceful society. I don't think this is true. I believe in, the fact that America is the strongest country in the world and sort of dictates the terms and its allies. I think this is the best thing for global stability. And this is something I'm not sure if Trump understood, but it's something Trump did. I'm not sure if Mike Pompeo did his homework and he just signed his name on it. I don't care. And you saw the failing of this. This is like the JCPOA, right? The Iran deal, as it's known. This I see as a geopolitical disaster because it's this multilateral multinationalism thing played out. If we are just nicer, if we stop being number one, if we are no longer bullying Iran and we give them $1 billion and we show that we're willing to work together, this through the power of friendship, we will inspire this moderate movement. I'm giving air quotes on YouTube because it doesn't exist. They will then come over and the moderates will overtake the hardliners and we'll have a reformist Iran, right? That is the failure of, I think, globalist policy.
So when it comes to Iran, I mean, Iran is the quintessential example of a pariah state that has been, ridiculed and targeted by the West. And so has received sympathy and sort of support by many countries that don't want to simply align or conform to this neoliberalist Western US/agenda or what they believe it to be. So, despite all the maximum pressure that the Iranians have felt under the Trump administration, they've continued to still be quite, operational. Maybe with the support increasingly of the Russians and the Chinese. When the JCPOA was first established or was beginning to be negotiated by the Obama administration, I try to pull a bit of a middle line in the sense of I will be open to everything. There's a potential for some genuine constructive collaboration between the Iranians and the West/US to be possible, then I think that that's an opportunity. I'm not an expert on Iran like you were or are, and I'm not claiming to be still now, but that was definitely I was only 18, I'm 19, I'm 29 now. So you watch and you learn about that thing, and it was the lack of consistency in the policy or response from the Iranians in the sense of what they were saying versus what they were doing, that wasn't very reassuring. And Rouhani, for all his supposed moderacy or pragmatism or reform characteristics that were interestingly assigned to him by, I think, Western analysts or think tanks, they categorized him as a reformer. Clearly wasn't the case. And now we've got Rossini and in the past few years with Soleimani's role and all this sort of stuff. The dynamics have changed a lot. And it's really put a test to the US in the sense of with Afghanistan's withdrawal and the overall reduction in Western interventionism, i.e. through military means, how do we go about instigating that behavioural change? How do we ensure that?
So I'm gonna push back on something.
How do we make sure that Iran doesn't get that nuclear weapon or something like that? So we are, I think, in a bit of a phase of Western restraint. Some people have argued, but go for it. Tell me where you stand.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to push back on some of this. One, you're right that the inconsistency in policy between administrations has not been helpful. But I will push back in the sanctions and maximum pressure historically have worked. Right before Obama got in, Iran was under sanctions, and they were, this is I get from my friends who were political prisoners who were living in Iran at the time. They were obviously on TV. America's the great Satan. Never give in. Iran is so strong. We're the richest, most prosperous country in the world. American sanctions mean nothing to us. And then all of a sudden, it was kind of getting to them that they needed to bow in. So they started to test this phrase called heroic flexibility, which means they were going to bend over and take it from the Americans. But then Obama got in and sort of let them off the hook and gave them sanctions relief for nothing, right? Never negotiate without preconditions.
But you're saying that they removed the sanctions or reduced the sanctions or introduced sanctions relief before the deal had been struck, which was
yeah, they had. And then the deal, right? Then the deal was giving them unfreezing billions of dollars of assets and throwing even more money in. So there was sanctions relief prior to this. So this is, again, the failure of Obama's foreign policy the dynamic in Iran hasn't changed. They've gone from one theocratic fascist to another theocratic fascist to another theocratic fascist. It's always been the Islamic Republic. There's been this veneer of a fake democracy of reformist and hardliners slapped on top of it. And the only difference now is this illusion is totally gone, both domestically. It died internally in Iran in 2017, right? You had the Green Movement in 2009, where there was this, everyone knew that Ahmadinejad was going to be reelected, but there was this kind of internal feel that, the reformers might get in, Mousavi, he might be the great reformist, he might win. There's a big come out and vote. The students organized, they tried to reform, and then they said, okay, Ahmadinejad won with 62% of the vote. I think they changed it to 65% of the vote later, when they said, let's make it a stronger majority. And they counted this entire election in 3 hours. But so they rigged, it's all fake elections, but this was sort of, we want a reformist, we got a hardline. It was only, and then in 2017, where the internal slogan, the first mass country uprising was, reformist, hardliners, you're all the same. That was a 2017 mass protest where we saw Hijab Street, the girls taking off their hijabs and the smoke screen, like those first images. This is when internally it died. And it wasn't until the most recent iteration of the revolution, the Masha Amini one, where Iranians submitted to get enough of a voice in Western media that is not these sort of regime chill, fake reformist Nayaki types who've been pushing this lie, and they've been able to sort of grab the mic and say, no. Here's actually what things are like inside Iran, and we don't want reform, we want revolution. So it's not that anything's really changed, it's that our perception has now been corrected on a wider scale. And maximum sanctions and maximum pressures always work. Like, the regime was having a much harder time funding and committing international acts of terrorism under the Trump administration, because the Trump administration was putting sanctions and pressures on them. And if they acted out of line, they were punished for their action. So the strategy vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic should be very simple. Understanding they're a pariah state, they cannot be reformed. They are theocratic lunatics, and their goal is world domination. And one, to destroy the West, like destroying Western civilization is one of their big rah-rah things at the Friday prayers. Khomeini gets on TV all the time. We're going to destroy them. They're enemies. I mean, fight your enemies. This is good foreign policy. Like, this is where, like, I hate the America first and Canada first people, like the groups, like the Tyler Russells and Nick Fuentes, like, not people, because I'm a Canada first or America first foreign policy. This is good foreign policy. It should be America number one first, But then that's where the isolation is stopped. They're like,
but you're not a nationalist, mate. You're pushing for Canadian. You're pushing for America.
Allied countries are second. Countries with strategic interests are third. And fight your enemies. Like, that's foreign policy. Self-interest first, allies second, strategic interest third, fight your enemies, and then neutral and neutral countries. Like, this is very simple foreign policy. It's where, and then this is where like the debate dies. So we can't, like, because the radical left, if you say, well, no, you actually need an America first foreign policy if you're America, it just wouldn't make sense. Like, you can't deal with Saudi Arabia if Saudi Arabia is not Saudi Arabia first. Like, Saudi Arabia should be Saudi Arabia first, because then their wants and motivations. You can get into a friendship and an alliance with someone if you understand, if we get into a mutually beneficial alliance where I bring something that benefits you and you bring something that benefits me, right? And we understand that about each other, we can have a lasting alliance if we both have self-interest, right? This is good, right? But you can't say this to the radical left because, America can't be first because colonialism or whatever buzzwords I learned in college, right? But it needs to be this. And then you can't have a conversation with the America first people because they're just isolationists. And you're like, well, no, we need to trade with this country because we don't have lumber and they have lumber and you need wood and like globalism, right? So this is where there's a complete breakdown in the discourse on all sides. And it gets quite frustrating for people like us.
I mean, how can you be isolationist? It's just stuff. I believe, as I said, with protectionism, but all people do is they label, and this is what I find quite funny about the right and left. Both sides do it within their own ways, right? They love labeling you because they think that you associate or align with a certain set of values or principles. The right being very much about, we hate being labeled, and then they go, oh, he's a globalist. Mate, you just labeled me there. And like, oh, wait, and then that freaks them out. Anyway, with Iran, as I say, I've always wanted to be a bit of a sort of idealist and hope that we can find a way to engage. But, that clearly isn't the case with this bunch. And we've got to find a way to undermine and restrict their capacity to destabilize and risk not just Middle Eastern, but global issues. I mean, what I think was really interesting, and to your point about America first kind of politics, I think there's a balance in the sense of every country should obviously stand up for their national interests, because otherwise you're not going to have much of a nation left if you don't. But equally, do what you can to be an international player. I mean, there's a lot of caveats and rabbit holes that we could go down, right? But I'm going to use the UK as an example. But with China and, say, Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia responded to China's visit in December with some high degree of interest, whilst Iran were really pissed. Okay, I'll edit that bit out. They were really pissed off because, arch nemesis, lifelong rival of regional hegemonic ambitions for both parties. And here we have the Chinese with them, sound fancy for a second, benevolent neutrality either way, as in they do what they need to, not what they think other countries want them to do. Now they're hosting the Iranians in China. So I think Iran is very good at making relationships based on economic and sort of strategical interest. But then again, that's the point. If you can bring some of those other actors who work with Iran for whatever reason more on side, or just give them something better, then that leaves Iran with basically nothing, right? The only reason North Korea and China have a relationship is because North Korea is a hugely strategically important point of access to the sea for China, in case they can't get out of the South China Sea, because they're basically encircled from the Philippines to the Taiwanese to the Japanese to the South Korean. But also because North Korea is a good, standoff against South Korea and America's troops there and everything. But if they could, they would let go of North Korea in a million years, in a heartbeat, because it's a bloody totalitarian, erratic state with no nuclear weapon development and a dude who doesn't have a good father. So, I think it's really interesting, the Iranian file. I think for me, it brings me back to what Jason Brodsky said often, which is, the deal is dead, but is it buried? And even 2 or 3 days ago, right, I was listening to a podcast and it's like, they mentioned Biden has said the deal is dead, or he said it in a passing remark, I think back in the late fall or something. Well, then why aren't you following through with that on policy, man? Like, no one in the White House actively believes at this point in the deal. Quintessential illustration of that phrase. To what end? Like, seriously, what? Just to prove, just to show for purpose sake that you're doing something? Like, what? Like, seriously, what are we going to do other than the deal? Like, right, and actually, let's do a role playing this, a simulation. Scrap the deal, it's dead and buried, jumped on the grave, gone. What happens then?
Okay, so yeah, I kill the deal, right? So I'm now Joe Biden, right? I've taken over his body. So sanctions are only as useful as your will to enforce them. So I would have the will to enforce said sanctions. If America already lists the IRGC as a terrorist group, I would encourage all the allies to do the same, right? I would make sure and the domestic thing, right? The domestic control of the IRGC on the Iranian economy needs to be under the terrorism listing, right? Okay, so that's a big priority. And then you have Magnitsky laws in Canada and the US, that you go after human rights abusers. Khomeini, his son, they aren't sanctioned, right? So you have Raisi, Khomeini, all these top level people with bank accounts there, they aren't sanctioned. So go to maximum pressure on them, and then make it clear that it's not a legitimate. You support. You don't support the Islamic Republic. You don't have to outright. I wouldn't outright say I crown the crown prince as the official opposition. I wouldn't go outright and say it because that can cause problems internally and externally as well. But I would be meeting with anti-regime elements, including Reza Pahlavi, and send a clear message to the world that the Islamic Republic will be gone soon, and that you're moving on to find the new Iran. Right? Dealing with what Rob Malley is doing, he's essentially dealing with the Islamic Republic. Like, this is all going to blow over, and where are we going to be in 10 years? Right? And that's the problem with it. And a lot of it is I don't think Rob Malley is a real believer in the Iranian people. And he's acting like it, and it's causing problems. So it's about will to enforce sanctions is the one thing. Like, I would replace all the NIAC affiliated reformist JCPOA people with like Pompeo or whatever.
Right.
People like me. I would make a State Department that is more ideologically aligned to this, and actually enforce these sanctions and use the leverage that you have as president of the United States of America to encourage other countries to get on board, to say, Canada, you can't be a safe haven for terrorist money laundering any longer. Okay. Out with the Islamic Republic stuff, right? We just had this story break yesterday of 3 businessmen that the FBI are investigating Canada, who are basically using Canada as a front to launder money to the Islamic Republic and different terrorist organizations, even taking COVID subsidies and sending them to like the Islamic Republic. Like, it's a joke. This needs to stop. So it's not so much about how many sanctions you have; it's about who has the will to enforce it. And also, the terrorism listing of the IRGC needs to be done. And targeted Magnitsky sanctions on the big Raisi, Safavi, and Khomeini. I mean, like, these 3 can't be unsanctioned as it is. And you could also go to maximum pressure, where you can sort of harass their assets internationally, whether disrupt the Houthis, Hezbollah, or I would let the Israelis do it. Like, the Israelis love bombing Iranian proxies and regime proxies. Let them do it. Stop stopping them. Like, just let the Israelis fight the IRGC globally, and say, yeah, sure, if the Israelis want to fight the IRGC, let them, help them.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, what we saw with these strikes in Israel, well, most likely from Israel to Iran, that's pretty, that's pretty volatile and spilling over. And as I say, I'm a pragmatic idealist. I wouldn't say, I don't know if I'm a restrained person. I'm not a neocon. I certainly don't believe in just intervening in everything anymore. But I probably veer a little bit more on the side of waiting to see about the assessment, like a little bit like, say, the Chinese airplane, most ridiculous example, right? But I would have been like buying and sort of monitoring it a bit, and then it's sort of in airspace, and we clearly know what it is. Like, okay, guys, it's time to shoot it down, right? What took so long? So I try to toe a line of balance there. But I don't know if going whole hog with the Israelis just to sort of take on the IRGC, which is a pretty sizable, competent thing, would that be a wise idea? I'm just worried about the Middle East going. Iranians may be sanctioned, absolutely, but we need that snapback mechanism of the UN sanctions, find a way to target specific entities of the Iranian establishment. But equally, they are still pretty well ingrained in so many different theatres and proxies that I'm is that easy? Now, whilst I believe that what the Russian army and the Kremlin are doing in Ukraine is of terroristic nature to a certain extent, I think designating the entire state would be absolutely bizarre and background, because it would be, just the wrong way to go about it. So for me, but because of Russia's interests in Syria, in Iran, or over Iran, in Africa, and so many other things, right? Iran, though, the point I'm making is that when it was designated a state sponsor of terrorism by the Americans, there was such a big step up in terms of that impact of how complicated it was for America to do that versus micro states or small states like Cuba, Syria, and North Korea, which are not big countries in terms of players. Iran's already a different level, and then let's not even get started on Russia. So how else do we do that? You know what I mean? So that's a really long-winded way of saying,
Well, my answer to this is, the IRGC is already engaged globally in multiple different countries. I mean, they're funding Boko Haram, and them in Africa, massacring thousands of people there. They started a war in Yemen. They're in Lebanon. They're in Syria. They're wherever they can be, right? They're running narco-terrorism through Central America, using Venezuela as a base. So we're already in worst case scenario, is my response to this. And they're already considered a state sponsor of terrorism by the U.S. government, which they actually are. Their goal is global terrorism. That's the, evil FBI / CIA hybrid, the SS they have there, right? Just like I think it's fine I wouldn't say Russia should be a state sponsor of terrorism, but if you declare the Wagner Group a terrorist organization, I would agree with that. Like, I think that's a reasonable measure to take.
Yeah, 100%.
And again, this is a bit of apples and oranges, Russia to Iran. So not the greatest. Okay, so I'm a bit of a gambler here, right? I've always been a very good poker player. I think math is fun.
Really?
This is my background in stand-up comedy and poker comes into effect here, where I say, all right, I think it's worth the risk here. I'm not saying, hey, just let the Israelis duke it out with the eyes and nothing is going to come of it. But you have right now a Islamic Republic that doesn't have nuclear capability, but wants it. So that time bomb is ticking. You also have domestic conditions now where they're at incredible economic and social strain. They understand the geopolitical threat of the Islamic Republic. They have a very intricate spy network throughout Iran that's proven quite fruitful. Let them actively destabilize and push buttons and don't get in their way, right? Go back to the Trump administration policy of, cooperating and not snitching on the Israelis versus the Biden / Obama policy of, running to the Islamic Republic every time Israel tells you a secret, right? This is more what I'm saying is don't be oppositional to the Israelis and sort of like share intelligence with them, basically on Quds Force stuff. And you've already seen this. The Israelis have made the calculation that they're trying to bait Iran into further conflict in Syria right now because they know they're weak and they don't have the money to do it. And this has always been like a secret, not so secret war where the Israelis and the IRGC are fighting a proxy war in Syria. Like, and people are like, Israel's bombing Syria today. How terrible. I'm like, how many Syrians died? 0. But they're Quds Force members that are dying, right? It's all IRGC colonels and operatives that are dying there. And this is this thing where Israel's saying, no, we didn't bomb Syria. And Iran can't say, well, we died in Syria, because they're pretending they're not in Syria right now, even though they're very open about being in Syria. It's to sort of pretend to sort of like Western anti-establishment left and right people, where they can say, we're about peace and love. And, we're the Islamic Republic. We believe in love and peace and all that. And it's America that destabilizes the world. And we're the lovable, underdog, that type of stuff. So they've had this sort of thing where both countries have fought in Syria, but are pretending they're not. Whereas you saw the Israelis in the revolution sort of throw the pretense off and say, no, we're in Syria, you're in Syria, come get us. Because now they're trying to goad them into spending resources outside of the country to exacerbate a resource crunch that they're going through because their people are striking, the people are protesting, they're forced to reports of them recalling, Hezbollah, Hashal-Shabi, all these Arab militants they funded, recalling them domestically to help police their own people. So this is sort of the calculation that you have to make, that if you want to overthrow the Islamic Republic, which is a malign, malevolent actor on the world stage and has zero chance for reform, right? It's not going to reform. This is the best time to do it. It's a now or never ploy, is what I'm saying. And I think, there's enough chips in the pot and the pot odds are in your favor that this is the time to push the issue and make a gambit, a global gambit, one would say, and try and take out the regime right now. This is where I would be. But again, I'm quite hawkish on this issue. So,
is Islamic State, right? Even though that as a physical entity was largely eradicated 2016-17, it became the most dangerous thing of all, which is an idea. And so you can spin it the other way and emphasize or imply that the idea of this Islamic Republic being sodded off and replaced with something that Iran can actually work with and be a constructive actor is much more potent. Mr. Daniel Bordman, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
I'll make a plea for Piotr. It's a lot less awkward to do. Guys, help him get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. Just go over, click the button, and then monetize from them and get it out. Just do it, or else I will hunt you down and I will kidnap your dog and I will feed it to Klaus Schwab. If you don't have a dog, I will buy you a dog, make you love the dog, and then give it to Klaus Schwab. So you have to
skin the dog. Anyway, all right. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Daniel Bordman.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Global Gambit. Did you agree with Daniel's comments? Love to hear what you think in the comments. And at the very least, do like the video. I'd like to thank my patrons, particularly people like Matt, allowing me to invest in better quality so that we go from that to this and bring you better conversations, which we can all learn from together. But until next time, take care.